everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I will be reading you Capturing the Interest of the Orange Juice Consumer from the book Squeezed, What You Didn't Know About Orange Juice by Alissa Hamilton. Alissa Hamilton has a PhD from Yale University. She has spoken at TEDx Cambridge and has been featured in The Guardian, The New York Post, The Los Angeles Times, The Boston Globe, and many more. She is a former Food and Society Fellow with the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. Hamilton lives here in Toronto, Canada. So without further ado, here is Capturing the Interest of the Orange Juice Consumer from the book Squeezed, What You Didn't Know About Orange Juice. Enjoy. Picture a room full of high-powered lawyers questioning government regulators and industry and consumer representatives in an attempt to determine what orange juice is. Although this sounds like a Monty Python skit, it was actually the backdrop for FDA hearings into the matter of orange juice and orange juice products, definitions, and standards of identity. The hearings, which ran through the first half of 1961 and produced over 3,000 pages of transcribed material, attest to the weight given to the search for orange juice's identity. The FDA convened the hearings after receiving more than 60 letters of objection, mostly from orange juice industry representatives, to notices of proposed rulemaking regarding the creation of orange juice standards of identity. The agency's authority to define standards of identity derives from what is now S-341 of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. This section opens with the imperative, quote, "Whenever in the judgment of the Secretary such action will promote honesty and fair dealing in the interest of consumers, he shall promulgate regulations fixing and establishing for food under its common or usual name, so far as practicable, a reasonable definition and standard of identity." The Secretary's obligation to set standards of identity triggered debates over the meaning of honesty, fair dealing, and interest of consumers during the orange juice hearings. In the model bureaucratic world, monolithic institutions implement the black and white letter of the law. In our world, conflicted and conflicting individuals meet to decipher words with more than one meaning. In this chapter of federal orange juice regulation, the FDA's chief lawyer, Bruce Brennan, shouldered much of the responsibility of putting S-341 to the practice of protecting the orange juice consumer. The 12 orange juice identities that are detailed in the federal code are a tribute to Brennan's perseverance. The family portrait portrays prolific orange juice innovation. First in line is orange juice. Following are 11 processed variations on the formative juice. In order of appearance in the federal code, they are frozen orange juice, pasteurized orange juice, canned orange juice from concentrate, frozen concentrated orange juice, reduced acid frozen concentrated orange juice, canned concentrated orange juice for manufacturing, orange juice with preservative, concentrated orange juice for manufacturing, and concentrated orange juice with preservative. The hearings concentrated on 5: orange juice, pasteurized orange juice, canned orange juice from concentrate, and frozen concentrated orange juice. The application of S-341 in the interest of consumers to the manufacturer and marketing of these most popular forms of orange juice became one of the most critical and difficult issues to resolve. Excluding FDA personnel, only a handful of witnesses appeared at the 6-month-long proceedings on behalf of the consumer, for whom the standards were being written, and therefore the task of interpreting the interest of consumers was complicated. Nevertheless, the testimony of these few consumer witnesses combined with the FDA's S-341 mandate to protect the consumer's interest prevented the hearings from becoming an exclusive forum for industry opinion. The advocates for the consumer's case consisted mostly of FDA officials and members of various consumer organizations. The Federation of the Women's Club and the American Home Economics Association anchored the side presenting critical consumer issues. The testimony of Faith Fenton, then professor of food and nutrition at Cornell University, was especially influential in addressing the interests of orange juice consumers. Her experience, ranging from World War II research into the effects of freezing, dehydration, and irradiation on the palatability and nutritional value of food, to involvement in the food industry's Institute of Food Technologists, gave her unique insight into the history, makeup, and manufacture of processed foods. As a member of the American Home Economics Association, she wore another hat as consumer, nutrition educator, and new industry product promoter. The labeling of standardized foods was at the top of Fenton's agenda. She wanted to see more detailed labels. As a nutrition educator, she was concerned about marketers convincing consumers which foods they should buy. According to Fenton, labels should contain the information necessary for the consumer to make an intelligent choice among orange juice and orange juice products. The opinion was consistent with the philosophy of the FDA Commissioner George Larick, who, Fenton reminded those at the hearings, had pronounced, quote, "The consumer has a right to know what is in his food." The language of rights, which is derived from the Constitution, a text as authoritative as it is unread by the public, is liable to pass as highfalutin words apposite a select few. But Fenton saved Larick's decree from the irrelevance of theory by situating it in the contemporary context that gave it concrete meaning. She observed, quote, "The consumer is becoming more and more dependent on food that has been partially or fully prepared for use." She continued, quote, "The USDA estimates that in the next 15 to 20 years, the quantity of processed foods offered to the consumer will increase half again as much as will unprocessed foods." Evidence that the rising use of prepared food was not a fleeting trend which added dimension to Larick's edict. Consumers' growing reliance on the distant producer for food fostered a demand for the right to knowledge concerning the preparation of their food. The move from home to industry-manufactured food brought with it not only new rights, but also new and shared responsibilities. Larick's identification of a consumer's, quote, "right to know what is in his food," positioned the only rights-providing body, government, in a lead role. Fenton widened the scope of duty by introducing the processor-turned-provider, or industry. She expected a lot from this performer. Quote, "More and more the maintenance of high standards of food is coming to rest on industry." At the same time, she insisted that, quote, "more and more responsibility rests on the consumer to help develop proper standards to protect his food supply." The three-character play, government, industry, consumer, is still running today. In the 6-month production run of the Matter of Orange Juice and Orange Juice Products, Definitions and Standards of Identity, not one among the trio made an impressive showing. Government was unconvincing in its role as enabler of the consumer's right to know. The FDA ignored its script when it chose standardization for federal orange juice regulation. Fenton did not let the FDA's oversight go unnoticed. She was critical of the nondescript label that characterized standardized foods. The labels confounded even experts in the field of food and nutrition. Fenton noted that, quote, "Some home economic people say that since no ingredients are listed on the label, they thought no added ingredients were present." This hearsay led to her concise summary of the problem with standardization. Quote, "Unfortunately, the food products about which consumers often know the least are those which have been standardized." She argued that if standardized foods were singled out as not requiring ingredients lists on their labels, their special status should at least have to be made public. The performance of the other two in the group was equally wanting. The industry far from lived up to Fenton's expectations. Its failure to maintain high standards of food was part of the reason the government was acting in the first place. The consumer's showing was also less than glowing. Despite Fenton's assertion that, quote, "the desire to know is a desirable characteristic of the present-day public," The public's thirst for knowledge was barely decipherable in the hearing room. Only one of the 7 odd consumer witnesses who participated in the hearings was a man, and the women who testified were often overpowered by the deeper male voices present. Although few and far between, words from representatives of the consumer's interests, such as Fenton, did emerge within the flood of industry FDA banter. Ruth Robinson, who identified herself as a housewife and vice president of the Federation of Homemakers, reinforced Fenton's efforts to raise the profile of the consumer's right to know. She described her organization as a representative group of homemakers who incorporated after attending hearings regarding the Food Additives and Chemical Preservatives Act. Those hearings led to the Food Additives Amendment in 1958, which reclassified food additives as prima facie adulterants. Robinson spoke firmly of the housewife's rights. Quote, "We feel it is our right to have true freedom of choice in the product we buy." Her invocation of the right to free choice in the context of the packaged food purchase raised food shopping to the status of constitutionally protected expression. Having planted the right, she stressed the cardinal condition of its germination. Quote, "Obviously, we cannot have choice unless we have adequate labeling." Her reinforcement of the need for enabling labels reminded FDA regulators, distracted by industry opinion, of its duty to the consumer. FDA officials attending the hearings did accept that the housewife had certain rights when it came to food purchases. However, the claim they acknowledged was not the same as the one Fenton, Robinson, or even Larrick maintained. Lowry Beckham, deputy director of the FDA's Division of Food, recognized a different kind of right when he took the stand to defend the FDA proposed percentage of orange solids in commercially reconstituted juice. Quote, "When the housewife goes to the store and buys a product of orange juice concentrate or reconstituted orange juice, where someone else has gone to the trouble to reconstitute the juice for her, she is certainly entitled to no fewer orange solids than she would get at home if she reconstituted the product herself." While Fenton and Robinson expressed the food consumer's right in terms of personal liberty, Beckham couched it in the rhetoric of property security. The housewife had title to a uniquely late 20th century life necessity. She was entitled not to land to live on, nor even to the fruits of the land to live by, but to food, equal to home reconstituted. The right that Beecham conceived gives new meaning to John Locke's labor theory of private property. In the second of his 2 treatises of government, Locke states the premise upon which his seminal defense of private property is built. Quote, "Man has a property in his own person." He proceeds, quote, "The labor of his body and the work of his hands, we may say, are properly his. Whatsoever then he removes out of the state that nature hath provided and left it in, he hath mixed his labor with, and joined to it something that is his own, and thereby makes it his property." Beecham's words may as well be Locke's, adapted to a world where the supermarket is second nature. If Beecham's housewife substitutes for every man and supermarket substitutes for nature, Locke's statement now reads, "Whatsoever housewife removes out of the state that the supermarket hath provided and left it in, she hath mixed her labor with, and joined to it something that is her own, and thereby makes it her property." The resemblance between Beecham's right to reconstitute orange juice and Locke's right to private property is not entirely superficial. Locke's labor theory can be used to justify the orange juice right that Beecham staked out for the consumer. When the housewife Beecham spoke of went to the store, purchased a can of frozen orange juice, took it home and mixed it with water, she literally mixed something that is her own into it. She thereby made the home reconstituted orange juice her property. There ends the parallels. The rights that Beecham imagined for the housewife in the juice she reconstituted were more expansive than Locke's theory could support. They extended to control over the actions of the processors who mimicked her household moves. The processor's reproductions had to replace her reconstituted juice exactly, thereby raising Locke's right to untold heights. The shift in the United States to a diet of mostly and increasingly heavily processed foods was not trivial. The substitution of frozen for fresh and later reconstituted for frozen concentrated orange juice was a symptom of the substitution of Beecham's orange juice buyer for Locke's laborer. It was also symbolic of a more encompassing dietary overhaul brought about by the migration from rambling farm to prefabricated, reconstituted, white-fenced home. The new North American menu recast basic provisions that were once made and safely contained within the private domain into industrially produced and publicly traded products. This turning of food inside out dispossessed the housewife of her role as domestic food preparer. Hence Beecham's fitting, if unwitting, revision of an ancient property regime to provide the 1960s housewife with fresh entitlements in frozen industry prepared foods. Beecham's description of the housewife's right to reconstituted orange juice as property meshed with the philosophy behind the standard of identity. The housewife's right to a specified number of orange sugar solids was a state-administered right to a state-defined base level of processed juice quality. Simply stated, a right to government protection from industry adulteration, or in the language of property, thievery. The right departed from the self-empowering right to know and freedom to choose that Fenton, Robinson, and Larrick articulated. Still, the recognition that the housewife had any rights was a start to balancing hearings in which industry interests were receiving more than their fair share of FDA's attention. While Beecham outlined the consumer's entitlements in reconstituted orange juice, Robert Kilburn, Director of Research and Development for the Florida Citrus Canners Cooperative, alleged a broader right of industry. Kilburn took to the stand to tell the FDA why it should not set a minimum Brix, which measures the height of sugar per volume of solution for a specific temperature, for canned orange juice. In the orange juice industry, Brix refers to the amount of orange sugar, or orange solid, per volume of juice. Brix is still the basis upon which juice oranges are commercially traded. Oranges range from 9 to 14% sugar solids. The FDA proposed a 10% minimum for canned juice, presumably in hopes of preventing canners from either watering down their juice or enhancing it with synthetic sugar. Although the minimum was lower than the suggested 10.5% for pasteurized and 11.8% for frozen concentrated orange juice, Kilburn was still dissatisfied. He had reason. With the growth in frozen concentrate and pasteurized orange juice technology, consumption of the high-heated, cooked-tasting canned juice with which he worked with was falling. Decreasing demand for canned juice translated into reduced bargaining power for its producers. Canneries were left with oranges that had unfavorable profiles, notably low percentage of orange sugar solids, or Brix. As a representative of a sector of the orange juice industry with so little control over the quality of its primary ingredient, Kilburn resisted regulations that would rule out any more material for manufacture. FDA lawyer Bruce Brennan admitted that setting the proposed minimum Brix for canned juice would change industry practices, but Kilburn was more forceful. Such a minimum, he said, would, quote, change our rights. His indictment of the canned juice minimums underscored the industry's inflated idea of its entitlements. Charles Brokaw, chief of quality control over the Minute Maid Company, fought for industry rights in less explicit terms. He opposed the FDA's creation of orange juice standard of identities on the grounds that fixed standards would stay progress. A witness for Edward Williams, Counsel for the National Association of Frozen Food Packers and the Florida Canners Association, identified recent and significant advances in orange juice processing. He pointed to extraction technology that increased efficiency and essence recovery research that could lead to the substitution of essence for fresh juice in the restoration of flavor to processed juice. He concluded that if the standards currently on the table were set in the early 1950s, when the new processing procedures had not been conceived, they would be illegal. The food industry, he cautioned, would be reluctant to invest in research knowing that new standards might arrest the application of research successes. His was a familiar industry refrain: government regulation hinders industry innovation. But Brokaw's focus on the industry's interests in arguing against standardization overlooked the fact that industry was not part of the S341 equation for determining whether the FDA should engage in standardization. During an earlier cross-examination, Beecham pursued the flip side of the laissez-faire environment conducive to creativity that Brokaw advocated: the dangers of unmitigated innovation. The opportunity arose when Williams asked Beecham whether there was a difference between partial and almost complete removal of liquid from orange pulp. When extracting juice from oranges, processors typically removed the pulp. Williams was trying to discern whether and in what form the FDA thought the pulp could be reintroduced. Beecham replied unequivocally that there was a difference. He knew not all pulp was equal. Alan Morris, formerly in charge of Tropicana's orange and juice procurement, explained in 2004 just how different the types of pulp added back to juice can be. Quote, "When you make orange juice, you take everything out of the orange, so you got the rag and the seed and the pulp and all. And you run it through a big drum that's a screen, and it pushes the juice and it screens the pulp out. Well, what's left behind is really a pumice. It's ground seeds and bitter. They put that in water and wash all the juice solids off, and that leads to a water solution that is about 4% juice, and then they evaporate that. The result is slurry that," he said, quote, "doesn't taste good at all." Beecham testified that pulp that had been washed, drained, packed into containers, and frozen was, quote, "a little far removed from pulp that was naturally present in orange juice when first taken out and blended back." He had a simple justification for distinguishing between the forms of pulp that Williams distilled. The greater the extent the product has been manipulated, the greater the possibility for abuse in preparing the finished product. Clearly, the downside to unfettered industry advancement was the enhanced opportunity for exploitative behavior. Beecham was not the only one concerned about industry abuse. Kilburn declared during cross-examination by Brennan that the consumer, quote, "accepts on faith the nutritional value of orange juice as a healthful product." Brennan followed up, quote, "We have then a case of the consumer trusting in the good faith of the manufacturer to be putting in ingredients which, as you say, are nutritional and which come from oranges?" Kilburn stood by his statement. Evidently troubled by the consumer's reliance on taste and the industry's good faith to obtain a quality product, Brennan persisted, quote, "Yet there is a situation which could arise where the processors could violate this trust, and yet the consumer would be unknowing, at least as far as appearance and taste is concerned. Isn't that right?" Kilburn's response undermined Brokaw's case against regulation. Quote, "That is the primary purpose of regulation, particularly the detailed form that it takes in Florida, to eliminate any such possibility." Brennan asked just one more question. Quote, "So that then there is reason for regulation in this area so that such a situation does not occur?" Kilburn's yes answer ended Brennan's examination. Brokaw's charge that standardization would hold up the juice processing operation lost force under Kilburn's confession that regulation was absolutely necessary. In recognizing the desirability of detailed regulation, Kilburn gave the go-ahead to the type of comprehensive FDA regulation that even he had earlier challenged as an undue restraint on industry rights. Federal regulation and orange juice betterment were apparently not, as industry argued at various points during the hearings, mutually exclusive. An industry representative, Kilburn, ironically advanced the FDA's fight to keep S341's interest of consumers within sight. He indirectly endorsed one of the FDA's basic motives for entering orange juice regulation. What was artistry to industry was potential sophistry to the FDA. The strongest appeal for FDA disengagement, industry's impressive inventiveness, was the very justification for FDA regulation. Kilburn's initial right to and Brokaw's freedom from arguments backfired. They brought to light the S341 interest of consumers that industry had been neglecting. The hearings into the, quote, matter of orange juice and orange juice products, definitions and standards of identity, addressed many issues particular to orange juice. At the same time, the government, producer, and consumer interaction that occurred lent universality to the hearings, as the back and forth between government and industry over the need for consumer protection by federal standards is timeless. Industry complained that regulation diminished its rights. Government responded with the consumer's entitlements. Industry warned that regulation would rule out research and development. Government responded that without it, consumers would be threatened with exploitation at the hands of unlimited industry ingenuity. While the industry FDA debate over orange juice standardization revised an age-old contest over the appropriate range of government, its intensity reflected a meeting between the two sides that was becoming more heated in the wake of the total makeover of homemaker into consumer. Hey everyone, thank you for listening and watching. So, what did you think? Personally, I loved how Alissa Hamilton, the author, mixed the perfect amount of wit with information to keep the reader interested. Literally anyone could pick up this book with any background and learn not just about orange juice, but processed food in general. I really did learn quite a bit. I'd hate to say it, but I have heavily relied on corporations to properly label what is in their food so I can decide whether or not I should buy it. And I guess therein lies some of the difficulty in navigating the supermarket. Without government regulators that care about consumers, we are at the whim of companies who are actually mandated to make a profit and to essentially put profit over the consumer. Further, as a consumer, it's kind of hard to navigate where to take food concerns, and sometimes we disregard each other's concerns as well. Thankfully, there are people like Alissa Hamilton so that I, the consumer, can make an informed decision on what to put in my endless expanse of a gullet. Anyway, I really do hope that you have enjoyed this little reading. And if you have, why not give me a like? Maybe even a subscribe if you're feeling frisky. And I shall see you next time. Remember, I love you. God loves you. Bye-bye.